Welcome to my top 10 games of the college football season, week 8. My weekly review where I go through and I give you the predictions, the Vegas predictions, the ESPN predictions, my predictions based on my overall analysis of the game, which I give a little bit of that on each of the games, why they made it in the top 10, why it's a great matchup. I give you my top players for each matchup, then I pick against the win-loss for each team and against the over-under on the spread. So far this season, I'm doing pretty well. I've got 61% on the win-loss, so not as well as I wish I could be doing, but above 50%, so that's good. 43 out of 70. ESPN does have me a little bit. They've had a couple of nice weeks, so they're sitting at 70%, 49 out of 70. Have a couple of really nice weeks to climb up there. I'm sitting on the over-under is where I hang my hat. I'm 73% against the over-under. If you like picking the games, if you like putting a little bit of money on it here and there, you definitely want to watch my channel because I'm doing very well against over-under. 51 out of 70 games I have picked correctly so far this season. Going over last week real quick, and then we'll get into the games. And like a reminder, every week I go through all top 10 games. I give you the television times, where to put them, as well as everything else that I said I review. I'm not going to rehash that. All right, so real quick, just looking over last week, did okay overall, 6 out of 10 on the win-loss, but it could have been a lot closer. Army almost beat Wisconsin. I was calling an upset, didn't quite get it there. Air Force, of course, upset my Boise State Broncos. BYU didn't play quite as well as I thought they would against Baylor, but they were in that game. So, we're looking at me being potentially 9 out of 10 here. And then Auburn, who I was rooting for to win that game, I just didn't see it coming, so I was picking Arkansas in that one just based on how the season's gone so far. But Brian Harsin did a great job preparing his team this week, pulled out all the stops, really kind of a shocking upset there for Auburn to win against Arkansas. So that was last week. Let's get into this week. This week of the college football season, it's college football. Every week's going to be awesome because it's college football. I'll watch any games. But compared to the amazing season we've had so far, this one doesn't quite measure up quite to the same extent as the other season of the week so far. It's the first week with no top 25 matchups, and there are some important games here. So the top 10 is a pretty good top 10, but usually I've got like 10 games on the outside in my others to watch category that could easily have been in the top 10. Well, this week, not so much. Top 10 real good games to watch here. As far as the others go, really the only one of note is Wisconsin versus number 25 Purdue. That's really the only one that didn't make it into the top 10 here. Other than that, I mean, it's college football. Watch the games. If you're a fan of your team, watch your team. But it's not going to be a sit on the couch all day kind of week as far as totally consuming your entire weekend because of just how many great games there are. But there are 10 great games, and we're going to get into those here. So sitting at number 10. And this one's not super impactful, but it should be a ton of fun to watch. 4-3 LSU versus 5-1 number 12 Ole Miss. Both of these games have had recent nail-biting finishes, just offensive explosion games that they've been involved in. 52-51 score for Ole Miss topping Arkansas, and then last week 49-42 as LSU went in and upset Florida. So both these teams have huge offensive firepower and honestly not that great defenses. So if you're a fan of offenses and just good old-fashioned SEC football, this is a game you're going to want to watch. Mississippi State is favored by 9 in this one, given a 71.5% chance of winning. You're going to want it's at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on CBS. All times are in Eastern time. My player of the game for this one shouldn't be a surprise is Matt Corral. Corral. Anyhow, you know who I'm talking about. The Ole Miss quarterback here. He is the leading passer and rusher for his team with over 1,700 yards passing, 14 touchdowns, and 450 yards rushing with another 8 touchdowns. He's only thrown 1 interception all season. So really an offensive offensive battle here in the SEC. Great game to watch. As far as who I'm picking in this one, I'm going to go with Ole Miss. I'm going to go with the experts on this one. I do think Ole Miss gets the score. They do look like the better team, obviously, but I think it's going to be an offensive just firestorm. Mississippi State is favored by 9 in this one. It could be one of those games that comes down to the nail-biting finish. I think there will be a lot of offensive firepower, but I think Ole Miss wins by at least 10 points in this one, so I'm going to go over on the under-over. All right, next game of the week is number 9. So the 9th ranked here is 3-3 USC versus 5-1 Notre Dame. This is pretty significant for Notre Dame because Notre Dame is still trying to hold on, trying to claw their way in and say that with a 1 loss, and that 1 loss being to a top 4 team in Cincinnati, that they deserve to be in the conversation for the playoffs, and if not the playoffs, for at least the New Year's Six. The issue is that Notre Dame has hooked their caboose to the terrible ACC, to just the worst Power 5 conference out there. It's definitely at least this season. So that's really going to pull Notre Dame down. They don't have a lot of great games left on their schedule to go out there and prove themselves worthy. But if they want to at least stay in the conversation to go out and win a New Year's Six, or get into a New Year's Six, even if it's not the playoffs, they definitely need to win the remaining games on their schedule. One more loss might drop them out of that conversation. So coming up here against USC, this would have been, historically, these are two historic teams. These are two blue bloods, foundational teams of college football, but unfortunately, it's just not going to be. It's not a USC team of times past. It's a USC team having another down year. It seems like we talk about that every season. Notre Dame favored by 7 points, 77.3% chance of winning. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on NBC. Top player for this one. Now, there's top players on both these squads. Unfortunately, Notre Dame's number one receiving target, their tight end, looks like he might be injured for this one as well. We'll have to see if he was able to come back. I would love to see him, but he was missed last week's game, and that was a big impactor in that one for sure, even though Notre Dame was able to get the win, but it was very close against Virginia Tech. So my top player for this is actually going to be the wide receiver, London, for USC. He is fourth in the nation receiving yards, 832 yards receiving, and 5 touchdowns. If USC has a chance of winning this one, it's going to be through his hands. He is an explosive presence for USC. I do think Notre Dame has the win in this one. I'm going to go over on the under-over, but I think it just will be interesting. It's a little bit, whenever you see two historic programs come against each other, regardless how each one is doing, those teams recruit well. They have good programs, good facilities. They know how to train up their players, and they always have good coaches, even if they're comparatively not the best coaches necessarily. I think USC, they're struggling a little bit, but they're still top coaches in the country, and they are still top teams. So I think that this is going to be a very competitive matchup, but I do think it's going to be over on the under here, over 7-point victory for Notre Dame. Okay, number 8, and this is where we start to get into the more interesting games, at least as far as the more impactful here. Number 18, 5-1 NC State at 2-4 Miami. Now, any other time in the last few seasons, these two teams coming up against each other, NC State would have been a massive underdog. Miami would have been the easy favorite. Might even have been considered maybe a trap game for Miami, but otherwise a game that they could breeze through. Well, not this year. NC State is having an amazing season for NC State. I followed NC State for a while after Ryan Finley from Boise State went over and played for them. I'm not a fan of NC State necessarily, but I have watched them and rooted for them on occasion throughout the last few seasons. I have several friends who are NC State fans. So I wouldn't necessarily call myself a fan, but I am supportive of NC State. And wow, are they just having an amazing season. I don't think anybody, I talked to a lot of NC State fans before the season started. None of them were feeling this way. I don't think anybody saw this season coming for this NC State team. And they are sitting right now in a spot. They're tied with Wake Forest here to go out and they're undefeated in the ACC, to go out and win their division of the ACC. They just have to get past Wake Forest. It's going to be a huge game here. I think it's in a couple of weeks. It's not next week. I think it's in a couple of weeks. That's going to be a huge matchup. But obviously they were able to get past Clemson. But if NC State drops one game at all prior to that Wake Forest matchup, they're looking at being out of the running again for getting into that ACC Conference Championship game, especially with Clemson hot on their heels here. So NC State's got to win them all. So they're favored in this one by 3.5 points, but only given a 50.7% chance of winning according to ESPN. So this is going to be a close game. It's a Miami team that's having a down year, that's struggling. Despite having a great quarterback on their roster, they're still struggling in this one. The game is at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN2. My top player of the game here is going to be the quarterback for NC State. I think he is the difference maker for this team. Devin Leary, 1,500-plus yards passing, 15 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, and that's big. He's not necessarily getting the massive yards, but he's mostly accurate, and he's being able to go out and score, which is the most important thing for a quarterback here. I think NC State does get the win and continues this impressive season, but Clemson, all they need is NC State really here to lose 1 or 2 games. If NC State loses a couple games here, Clemson is right back into this thing. So NC State, they've still got to get past Miami. I believe they still have to play North Carolina, and of course they have to play Wake Forest. So those are 3 big games there that's going to determine this season. Is this the year that NC State can go and represent the ACC in the Conference Championship? They've been close-ish a couple of times, not really with Clemson's dominance, but this is the year. Can NC State do it? We'll see. A big step forward is taken in this week against Miami. I think NC State will win this. I'm calling over on the under-over. All right, number 7. Now, with other teams, ACC, we're just talking about Wake Forest. Number 16, Wake Forest, undefeated, going up against 4-2 Army. Now, Wake Forest is really, it is honestly the ACC's last shot for getting a playoff team. But realistically, I don't even know if an undefeated ACC team this year, with the teams that are in the running for the playoffs and how terrible the ACC has been overall, strength of schedule-wise, I just don't think that even an undefeated ACC team in Wake Forest would get into the playoffs this year. Now, if it was Clemson, it already started out highly ranked, has all of this prestige and all this legacy that they're building on. And yeah, but Wake Forest undefeated, it's going to be a battle, but I don't even think that Wake Forest would get in. But any hope the ACC does have of getting to the playoffs is rested entirely on Wake Forest, and this is not an easy game coming up against Army. Might be a little bit of a trap game for them, might be overlooking, but this is an Army team that almost was this close, despite not having their starting quarterback right now, who's out through injury, Christian Anderson. So despite not having their top quarterback, this is an Army team that almost beat Wisconsin. I mean, they were, like I already talked about, they were this close to beating Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin's having a bit of a down year themselves, but, you know, Wake Forest needs to be careful in this one. This is not a guaranteed win. They're actually only favored by 3 points and only given a 65.4% chance of winning, which is pretty low considering that it's a Power 5 ACC program against Army. So, key player in this one is going to be the Wake Forest wide receiver, Robertson, who's already had 515 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. Really, the only reason that I didn't put anybody else is that between these two programs, with Army missing its number one rusher and passer in Chris Anderson, and the fact that the Wake Forest doesn't really have any star power, they've just been able to kind of get through their schedule so far. You know, Wake Forest is playing Army right now, and that's only the second team in the FBS that they'll have played that currently has a winning record. Of all the teams that they've played, Virginia and Army are the only 2 teams on their schedule that currently sit here with winning records right now. Louisville doesn't have one. Florida State doesn't have one. I forget who else they played, but that's it. Virginia and Army are the only 2. So Wake Forest, they're ranked highly here because they're undefeated, but they're not necessarily as good as this number 16 ranking shows here. I do think that they're able to go out and get this win, but it is going to be much closer than people are expecting. I do think that it will end up being over on the under-over just because of the way these things work out. I think it will probably be a touchdown, but it's going to be a very, very close matchup. Wake Forest, the last hope of the ACC. We'll have to see what happens this week. All right, number 6 in the nation for top 10 games of the week. Sorry, I drank some water weird before the start, I guess. All right, 5-2 BYU at 4-3 Washington State, and that is going to. Oh, and sorry, I didn't mention it. Noon CBS Sports Network for the Wake Forest game. Anyhow, 5-2 BYU at 4-3 Washington State, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on FS1. BYU favored by 4.5 points, got a 58.7% chance of winning, but is on a 2-game losing streak after losing to Baylor last week and then my Boise State Broncos the week before that. So BYU is trying to save their season here. I mean, they went from being in the conversation for the playoffs, lost to Boise State, out of that, to still be in the conversation for New Year's Six. And honestly, after that loss to Baylor, they're probably out of that too. Now, they do have a lot of other Power 5 teams on their schedule here. Washington State this week, they still play Virginia. They play USC. I cannot remember for the life of me who else they play. But they have some good teams coming up here that they can go out and play. And that together with the teams they've already beaten. I mean, they've already beaten Utah and Arizona State, I believe, is who they've already beaten. But Arizona. They went out and beat Arizona. Anyhow, the main point here is that BYU, if they can win out, they'll be 10-2 with multiple Power 5 wins. They might be able to work their way into, if not a New Year's Six conversation for a game, at least a really good bowl matchup against a good Power 5 team. But they've got to win out, and this is a perfect game to correct this slide. This is a Washington State team that's already lost their Group of 5 team this year, so it's a good chance for BYU to resurrect their season this week. BYU favored in this one, like I said, but it's really going to rest on their main running back here in Tyler Algier. 675 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns so far this season, but last week in the loss to BYU, only 33 yards rushing and 1 touchdown, and that was a major impactor in the reason that BYU lost that game. They just weren't able to get the running game going. If BYU, especially with the issues in the quarterback room right now, with Hall not looking 100% since that injury. I mean, they're saying that he's pretty much there, but I just don't see him being 100% since that injury. And Romney hasn't been getting the chances to come out and show what he's got since that concussion. So there's some question marks in that quarterback room for BYU. They need to get this win, but it's going to have to go through their running back. If they get the running game going, I think they're going to win this game, and I think they do establish this week. I think that it is going to be a BYU win, but I'm actually going to call under. I'm not calling a lot of unders this week, but I'm going to call under on the over-under. I think it's going to be a very close game, so a little risky here, but I'm calling under on the over-under on that 4.5 spread. All right. 5-1 Nevada at 5-2 Fresno State, number 5th game in the nation right here. This is a huge matchup for the Mountain West, and it should be a very, very interesting game to watch overall. Both these teams are sitting behind San Diego State right now, who's obviously is undefeated in the Mountain West. But all San Diego State's got to do is lose one game, and they still have to play both these teams. So these teams are definitely right there in the conversation to go out and get that Mountain West Division title, so they can go out and represent the Mountain West Championship game. And this head-to-head matchup here is going to be huge because, like I said, that Mountain West Division title is still completely up for grabs, with San Diego State still having to play both of these teams. And a big game this week against Air Force. We're going to talk about them here in a minute. So this is going to be at 7 p.m. on FS2. I really don't understand how this is at FS2. East Coast bias, ESPN, not ESPN, but the TV networks. Nobody cares about the Mountain West. But this is a amazing game from the top Group of 5 conference in the country this season. This is going to be an incredible matchup between two teams that are dominant right now this season. Nevada already has a win against Boise State. These are two very, very good Mountain West teams, and it's hugely important for the Mountain West as far as who's going to be able to represent potentially in that Mountain West Championship game. Fresno State is favored by 3.5 points in this one and given a 69.4% chance of winning. But this is the battle of the quarterbacks. In my opinion, this is the battle of the two best quarterbacks in the Mountain West right now. You have Carson Strong, who's thrown for 1,990 yards passing, 16 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, only 3 interceptions, going up against Jake Hayner, who's thrown for 2,326 yards passing. I believe that's still number 1 in the FBS right now. 20 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. So these are two quarterbacks that know how to get it done, are able to get the passing game really whipping for their teams. Fresno State, of course, has had some very impressive losses, with the very close loss to Oregon and some impressive wins with a win against UCLA. So this is a very good Fresno State team, one of the best I've seen in decades, not decades necessarily, but in a long time. One of the best Fresno State teams that I've seen in a long time, and this is the best Nevada team that I've seen since Colin Kaepernick was with the program back in 2010. So these are two just powerhouse right now, this season at least, Mountain West teams coming head-to-head in a major clash. It's going to be a very good game to watch. Number 5 overall top 10 games of the week. All right, number 4, back to discussing the ACC here. 4-2 Clemson at 5-1, number 23 Pitt. If you would have told me at the beginning of the season that this would be a ranked Pitt matchup against an unranked Clemson, I would have told you were crazy. I didn't expect Clemson to be as good as people were saying, but I didn't expect Pitt to be ranked and Clemson not. So this is kind of a weird change of pace here, a little bit of a weird role reversal. It's at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. Pittsburgh has a 3.5% chance of winning this and a 63% chance of winning overall. Now, my wife is a Clemson fan. I am not, but my wife is a Clemson fan, so we watch all the games. So I've seen a lot of Clemson football, and it's been pretty ugly this season. And going out and barely winning against Syracuse, who has traditionally, at least the last couple of years, been one of the worst teams in the ACC, doesn't look good for Clemson. And definitely is not the Trevor Lawrence Clemson of days gone by. But my wife made a good point that in that Clemson game, even though they won barely against, I think it was basically Syracuse missed a field goal or something like that. But despite barely winning against Syracuse, Clemson at least looked competent in that game. They looked like they were able to get things moving, and they didn't make as many mistakes as they have in the past. Now, part of that might be just going up and playing a team like Syracuse that is more forgiving if you're making minor mistakes, so they don't highlight as much. But Syracuse is okay this year. They're on an upward trend. They're playing, and they're not necessarily back to their 2018 level, but they're better than their 2020 selves for sure. So I think Clemson is moving in the right direction. I think DJ is starting to settle down. I think he is still a long way off from the potential that people see in him. He's definitely not Trevor Lawrence. But I think that Clemson is beginning to settle down a little bit. If they can get their wide receivers to actually catch a couple of passes here, just blatant drops last week. But if they can get their receivers a little bit more on the same page with DJ here, I think that Clemson comes in and wins this game. I think they prove to the nation that they're not necessarily back, but that they're still a team to be contended with in the ACC. And honestly, they're sitting here at 4-2, but only one of those losses is to an ACC program. As long as NC State drops 2 games the rest of the way here, as long as NC State drops 2 games, which they definitely might. Now, there's a really strong possibility. Like I said, they got a couple of really tough matchups here that they have to play. As long as they drop 2 games, and Wake Forest, which has to play Clemson, as long as Clemson beats Wake Forest, Clemson wins their division and gets to go represent in the ACC championship game and probably faces Pittsburgh again. So we could be potentially seeing a pregame of the ACC championship. But more than that, we could see a Clemson team start to reassert themselves and put themselves back on track, and definitely still is in the conversation, still in the hunt to go represent the ACC, even if it's not the season that Clemson fans have gotten used to from their team. So Clemson not favored in this one, but DJ, not necessarily, yards aren't really there necessarily, neither are the scores, but I think he's starting to move in the right direction. I think he is a key player for this team to get this win. I am predicting, it's crazy that this is upset alert, but that's where we're at with this insane 2021 season. So upset alert, bam, 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 upset alert. I'm calling Clemson to beat number 23 Pittsburgh, to disrupt the season there for Pitt a little bit, and Clemson to get the win. I'm calling over on the over-under and Clemson with the win. All right, number 3 game of the week here. Number 22, 6-0, San Diego State at 6-1 Air Force, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS Sports Network. This is a massive game. Air Force just got done beating Boise State last week. Still burns. But Air Force is my 3rd team. I have Boise State, Liberty University, and Air Force. So I bleed blue number 1. First of all, I always bleed blue first. So Boise State's I'm always gonna be rooting for them in that Boise State versus Air Force matchup. So it really hurts to have to root against my 3rd team here once a season when Boise State and Air Force play. But luckily this week, I don't have to. Air Force is done playing Boise State, moving on with the season. They're playing San Diego State this week, so I'm back to being able to root for the Falcons here. This is a big game for the Mountain West overall. So San Diego State Cincinnati is looking like they're going to get into the conference playoffs. Not conference playoffs, sorry, the college football playoffs. Cincinnati is looking like they're going to get in the college football playoffs. Coastal Carolina just lost to Appalachian State. And I wish that this video had come out earlier, because that game, Coastal Carolina versus Appalachian State, would have been the top 10. Now that we have Tuesdays and Wednesday games back, I'll have to start making these videos on like Monday. But enough about that. Coastal Carolina lost to App State, so they're out. They're done. They are not going to be representing in the New Year's Six, when they were the favorite to go do that. Since SMU is still ranked ahead of San Diego State here, but they still have to go. First off, they have to go play Cincinnati, and I think there's a chance when the College Football Playoff Committee comes out with their rankings in a couple of weeks that they don't. There's been a lot of bias towards SMU and the American Athletic Conference as a whole, but San Diego State is playing in the best Group of 5 conference this season. Undisputed. Sports Illustrated themselves came out and said, yeah, Mountain West better than the AAC this year. So Mountain West is viewed as the top conference in the Group of 5 this year, so I think that will help fight against some of that bias. They have a better record versus SMU, more Power 5 wins than SMU, and pretty much the same Group of 5 wins, but more Power 5 wins. And I think that there's a really good chance, assuming they can get past Air Force this week, that when those rankings come out, they'll be ahead of SMU. My main point in all of this, if Cincinnati gets into the college football playoffs, San Diego State, as long as they go undefeated and win the Mountain West Championship, is going to be the team that represents in that New Year's Six. That's a big if, because this is a really, really tough Mountain West. And they still have to play Boise State, and that's a rivalry game. This is a really, really tough Mountain West conference. But San Diego State is in a position to go out and represent in the New Year's Six. That's not something that any other team other than... that's not a position that very many Mountain West teams, besides Boise State, have been able to go out and say that often. So this is a really, really big moment for San Diego State. If they can get by this Air Force team, they have a chance of going out and representing. This is also a big moment for Air Force. They haven't really played a ton of top elite teams so far this season. I think FAU is better than people thought, and Utah State is better than people thought. And of course, I think Boise State, even though they're sitting here with a 3-4 record, is still better than that 3-4 record. So they have some nice wins, but this would really be their first premier marquee top 20. They'd be their first top 25 win, first top 25 win of the season. I think Air Force deserves to be ranked right now. I really do. But this is their chance to go out and say, we do absolutely deserve to be ranked. Now, Air Force is also, even though they've beaten Boise State and they are in the driver's seat here to go out and win the Mountain Division of the Mountain West, it's not guaranteed. They already have a loss to Utah State. If they lose to San Diego State here, Boise State's back in the conversation. Now, Air Force would still have the head-to-head. Boise State's lost 2 Mountain West games so far this season. But if Boise State went undefeated and then Air Force dropped another game down the road, they still have to go out and play Nevada. Boise State's back in the conversation. And, of course, Colorado State is undefeated. And then Wyoming only has the 1 loss as well. So this is a team that definitely needs to go out and win this game. This is huge for them to stay in that driver's seat, to prove that they are the Air Force team that a lot of people think they are. This is an Air Force team that's one of the best I've ever seen. They're coming off of that weird COVID year where they were allowed to send players home. One of the first times they've ever been allowed to do that in the academy. Usually it's 4 years and out. But they were allowed to give some of their players red shirts, so they're a deep team. This is going to be an incredible game. It has huge impactors for both teams. Air Force is favored by 3 points, given a 54.9% chance of winning. So ESPN predicting a very close one. Top player of the game here, Roberts for Air Force, the running back for Air Force here in Roberts. He has 818 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns, averaging 4.6 yards per carry. He had a huge game last week against Boise State, and he's 5th overall in the nation in rushing. So top 5 in the nation. The Air Force has a great quarterback in Zeke Daniels, but Roberts is really right now the game changer. I mean, he is slowly pushing out against the defenses, and then towards the end of the game, he is breaking off huge runs. So I think he's going to be a huge difference maker against San Diego State, which has the top run defense in the Mountain West. So this is going to be a very, very tough San Diego State rush defense they're going up against, much harder than they played against Boise State. But the issue I have here, and the reason and I'm going to say right now, I'm not calling Air Force victory in this one, is because Air Force didn't look as good as I thought they should have against Boise State, considering the Boise State defense that's on the field right now. It's Boise State defense that struggled last season, that struggled so far this year, that had a lot of injured players, that's still trying to find itself. That, it's a brand new head coach staff, it's a rebuild year. Air Force should have been able to go out and dominate them, and they didn't. Now, part of that is great credit to the Boise State coaching staff for being able to make the right adjustments, especially in the second half. Air Force did put up a lot of rushing yards, and they did run all over the defense, but not to the extent that they should have. In the second half, Boise State shut down the pitch game and the quarterback run game. They were able to grind it out on the ground through the dive, but overall, it just wasn't there in the execution in the second half. And in the first half, Boise State was able to just completely stop the dive, even though the pitch game was active. So they weren't as dominant as I thought they should have been in all phases throughout the game. And San Diego State has a lot of momentum coming in this one. And just realistically, I think overall has their team put together in a way that's right now is better than Boise State. So I do think that San Diego State gets the win here. They have both these teams have a lot to play for, but San Diego State has a lot more to play for right now. So I do think that San Diego State is able to get this win, even though it's on the road. It's going to be a tough matchup. But I think San Diego State's able to get this win. I'm calling over on the over-under. As much as that hurts me, as much as that pains me, as an Air Force fan and being a Boise State fan, I also hate San Diego State. So as much as that pains me, I do have to go with my analytical side, and I think that San Diego State's going to get the win in this one. All right, number 10, 5-1 Oregon at 5-2 UCLA. This is a big matchup for both teams because Oregon is not out of the hunt for the Pac-12 right now. They just need a couple of teams to lose in front of them and for them to win out, and they'll be right there at the end of the season. And Oregon here, of course, they're trying to, after one loss already to Stanford, they're probably out of the pack. They're out of the playoffs, but they're trying to hold on to this chance to go out and represent for the Pac-12 in the Pac-12 championship. So this is going to be a good game, just like the Mountain West game I was talking about earlier. 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. UCLA was favored by 1 point and given a 53.1% chance of winning this game. Oregon. Now, I'm going to give 2 key players of the game for this one, which is something I haven't done so far besides Fresno State versus Nevada. So I'm going to give two key players of the game for this one, and they're both on Oregon. It's safety McKinley, the third, who has 4 interceptions, and the other safety, Williams, who also has 3 interceptions. So out of the two of them, Oregon has 9 interceptions this season. Well, these two guys, between the two of them, have 7 of those picks. Williams has also returned one for a touchdown. They're also doing well on the tackling side, 34 for McKinley and 20 for Williams. These are two dominant safeties. I don't remember the last time I saw 2 safeties both with 3 and 4 interceptions. So these are really the key playmakers for Oregon here. I mean, they have an okay offense. It's not great, but their defense here is pretty much where they're hanging their hat, and their safeties here are a big reason for that. I think that is why I'm going to call Oregon with the win in this one. I'm calling over on the over-under. I think Oregon continues their push towards getting that Pac-12 championship, even if they're out of the playoffs at this point. All right. Top game of the week, and this one is a playoff potential team. Number 8, 6-0, Oklahoma State already has a win against Boise State. At 4-2, Iowa State, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. Now, the script has been completely flipped in this one. At the beginning of the season, Iowa State was seen as the team that was going to go out and potentially compete for that playoff. And Oklahoma State wasn't even ranked. So this script is completely flipped. Oklahoma State is undefeated. They really only have 2 major challenges after beating Texas last week. Oklahoma State just has to get past Iowa State and Oklahoma, and they'll be representing in the playoffs this year. So this is a really, really big game for Oklahoma State. On the other end, Iowa State isn't necessarily out of the hunt for the Big 12 championship game. They do need Oklahoma State to lose, which they can contribute a loss here, and then they need them to lose again, they don't need them to lose twice, but they do need Oklahoma State to lose, and they need Oklahoma. They need to beat Oklahoma, but they do that. Iowa State here, they have a loss to Baylor, so they need Baylor to lose as well. But Baylor loses a game, if Iowa State can beat Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, then Iowa State will represent the Big 12 championship game. So this is a major head-to-head battle here for the Big 12 championship in general, but it's also, like I said, playoff impacting, because Oklahoma State, if they lose this game, they're out of the playoffs. But if they win this game, they only have one more hurdle to get over to get into the playoffs this year. So this is an incredible matchup. Iowa State is given a 7-point advantage by Vegas, which I think is incredible that it's that high. I think it's crazy. And given a 78.2% chance of winning, according to ESPN. I really don't think that Iowa State is as good as people thought they were coming into the season. And I think this Oklahoma State team gets better and better each week. And most of that is because of Jalen Warren. 4 back-to-back 4 100-yard rushing games in a row this season. After starting out the season with about, I think it was like 45 yards rushing, it's like 38 yards rushing and 9 yards rushing, and then just exploding out of nowhere, starting with that Boise State game with 100-yard rushing games left and right. Last week he had 193 yards rushing versus Texas. He has 705 yards rushing so far in the season, 6 touchdowns, averaging 4.8 yards per carry. Just an incredible running back that the team is absolutely going to ride in my opinion, I think they're going to ride all the way into that Oklahoma matchup here. I do think Oklahoma State gets the win in this one, largely because Warren continues his success. Sanders might be able to contribute. He's been getting better and better each week. He's going to be key to this as well. But the main player for Oklahoma State is Jalen Warren here. I think he's the reason that Oklahoma State's able to go out and get this win. I think it's going to be a close one, though. It's my other second game. I'm calling under again on that 7-point spread. I think that Oklahoma State will be able to come in here and win this game, but it's going to be a close one right down to the end, probably up to a field goal of 4 points, something like that. All right, thank you for watching this video. As always, if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe. I might be wearing Boise State, and I do a lot of Boise State videos, but it's not all Boise State. I do college football stuff in general as well. So make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, go Big Blue!